Hello and welcome to Veg Around the World with me, Meenakshi Garodia, where I believe in simple recipes, authentic taste. In this show, we explore one country at a time through its vegetarian cuisine. Today, the country we've chosen is Korea. Now, currently, Korea is divided into North Korea and South Korea, but the culture, the food, the people, they're the same people. So, also what's interesting about Korea is that it has a lot of similarities to China and Japan because it actually is sandwiched between China and Japan, and at various times it's been occupied by China and by Japan. Now, the Korean people actually are supposed to be a very cultured people where arts and etiquette and manners and scholarly, I think it's also called like the land of the scholarly gentleman, that's very important. And even where food's concerned, you have very set etiquettes for eating, for drinking, and I'm going to talk about a little bit more about that later, and it's very interesting. So for food, Korea essentially has three types of foods in it. I mean, the basis is rice, vegetables, and meat. Now, rice is actually a grain that was introduced a bit late in Korea. Originally, you had barley and millet, and when rice was introduced, it was actually a little bit expensive. So it was like the treat. So a lot of the dishes that have been made, I'm not making any of them today, but they require a little bit of rice and a little bit of barley. But the dish I'm making today actually has rice in it. The way the Korean food is structured is typically you have a lot of side dishes called banchan and a main dish which could be a soup, or it could be a rice dish, or it could be a noodle dish, and you have dessert. So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to teach you how to make a couple of banchans. I'm going to teach you how to make scallion pancakes, which is one of my favorite things to eat. One of the big banchans we're going to make is the national dish of Korea, which is kimchi. Now, kimchi is fermented cabbage. A lot of the vegetables in Korea are fermented, and that's how they look. That's how it comes across. And we're going to do the scallion pancakes. I'm going to make kimchi, so I'm going to make kimchi pancakes, which is very tasty too. And I'm going to have bibimbap. Now, this is a hot stone pot. It's made of granite, and this is my absolute favorite Korean thing to eat. We're going to heat this pot, and we're going to layer it first with rice and a bunch of fresh vegetables and tofu, and we're going to have a hot sauce which you mix in it, and I'll show you how it's done. It's very tasty. And for dessert, what we're going to have is my take on Korean street food. Now, in Korea, you have a sweet pancake called hotteok, which actually is normally, it's like a pancake stuffed with sweet brown sugar and all. I'm going to stuff it with red beans. Now, red beans are azuki beans. It's something that's been in that part of the world for many, many years, like thousands of years. And it's, again, very simple to do. Some of these things take time, but it's very simple to do it. As always, we're going to start with the things that take the longest to cook. In this case, this would be the rice and the pancake mixture for both the kimchi pancake, the scallion pancake, and the dessert. And we're also going to set this hot stone pot to heat because this has to take time to heat. Now, if you do buy a hot stone pot for yourself, please remember you need to season it first. It's very interesting how you season it to make sure that your stone is appropriate. And never put hot and cold and hot because your stone will crack. It is stone. So I've put this on heat. On hot, and I'm going to start it off. I'm just going to leave it here and let it get hot. Once you've put it on, please be careful and use your gloves and make sure that you're safe. Now, for the rice, you can use any short grain rice. I'm going to use jasmine rice. For jasmine rice, we'll take 1 cup of rice. We'll probably just use half a cup, but it's better to make a little extra. Now, once this rice has been washed, you remove all the excess water, and you only add 1 1/4 cup of hot water to this. You have to see which rice you're cooking because the amount of water needed to cook different rices is different. You can't use the same proportion of water as to rice. In this, we're going to use 1 1/4. I'm just approximating the 1/4. And we're going to set this on the stove. We're going to let the water start bubbling and then cover it. Now, the other thing we're going to make right now is the pancake. Now, for the pancake mixture, which will ferment for a while, it's very simple. and it's so rich and tasty. So we're going to take 2 cups of flour, this is a salty pancake, and even with the dessert I want it to be salty because I like the flavor of sweet and salty mixing together. We're going to add 1 teaspoon salt, 2 eggs, and 2 cups water. Now you should take cold water for this, and sometimes you can even add an ice cube because if your batter is cold, it makes your pancake crispy. I'm going to add the 2nd cup of water. So I said the batter has to be slightly more liquidy than the regular pancake, like the American pancake breakfast. Give it a good stir, and you can stir it again in 5 minutes, and we're going to set this aside. Now that the water is boiling, we just turn this off and cover it, and we let it sit till the rice is cooked. What we're going to make next is kimchi. Now I said kimchi is the national dish, and actually the time taken is just around 20 minutes. Unfortunately, that 20 minutes is now after 5 hours and sort of after 72 hours. So what we use for this is something called Napa cabbage. It's a particular kind of cabbage, and I've just, because you had to work on it previously, you can't, it has to, you cut it into 2-inch squares and you soak it in salt water. So you take like kosher or thick salt and you mix around a cup of salt in water and you press it, and normally I keep it pressed with a weight on top so that all the cabbage is submerged. The water comes out of the cabbage, and it also makes the cabbage slightly more salty. So what we're going to do now is, this has been sitting for around 6 hours. We're going to make the sauce for the kimchi and then add this cabbage to that sauce. The sauce is pretty simple. Now kimchi essentially has a lot of chili paste in it, and this is Korean chili paste. It's a very difficult pronunciation. I think it's called gochujang. I'm obviously going to be not pronouncing it correctly, but I don't speak Korean. I just eat it. And what we're going to do is we're going to take a 1/4 cup of this sauce. In this, we're going to add sugar. We're going to add 2 tablespoons of sugar. Some scallions. Now scallions are spring onions. We're going to add, this scallion I'm going to use for the scallion pancake too. So we're going to add around 2 spring onions. Give it a good stir. And a tablespoon of ginger and a tablespoon of garlic. The way I remember it is that kimchi has 6 alphabets, K, I, M, C, H, I, and there are 6 ingredients. So you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Now what you do with this kimchi is you get rid of all the water and you rinse it in cold water. So I'm just going to do that. I soak it in the cold water, and then I just pick it up and I squeeze it. You want to get the excess water out, and you drop it in. Then you give it a good stir. Actually, it's better to use your hands because that way the cabbage doesn't get very mushed up. So you just like sort of toss it with your hands. Once this is done, you open up a container, an airtight jar, and you sort of stuff it into it. It has to be airtight because this has a really strong smell and you need to let it ferment. So if it's not airtight, you will not like the way it smells. You can make a couple of containers. Once it's fully stuffed, we're going to keep it like this, and we're going to let this ferment in a cool place for 72 hours. Now this is previously it really reduces because the cabbage sort of dehydrates a bit more, and I have used some of this already. It's too tasty, you can't resist. But this is what it will look like after 72 hours, and actually we're going to use this to make our kimchi pancake today. So we're going to make 3 sauces today. of the three sauces, one's going to be with the scallion pancakes, the other's going to be with the bibimbap, and the third one's going to be seasoning some of the vegetables in the bibimbap. We're going to take 2 tablespoons of soy sauce, one tablespoon of sesame oil. Now, I think sesame oil is like the secret behind Asian food. It is so tasty and flavorful and fragrant. I mean, I use it all the time, anytime I'm making anything Asian. We're going to add 1 teaspoon of sugar, and I use sriracha or I use this. I'm just going to use this right now because I have it right here. A good dollop, like a good teaspoon. If you don't like it so hot, then obviously you don't need to add it, but I'm going to mix this in. The next sauce I'm going to make is the bibimbap sauce. Now, in that, you take like 2 tablespoons of this gochujang. This sauce is so good. It's like a paste made with chilies, and there's a little bit of sugar in it. We're going to take this is a rice wine vinegar. We're going to take 1 tablespoon of it. A tablespoon of sesame oil, a teaspoon of sugar, and a teeny tiny bit of garlic. Now, raw garlic is actually very sharp. It's almost like spicy. It almost feels hot. So I don't like to add too much of it. Then again, we give it a nice stir. There's no soy in this. Now, typically when you eat bibimbap, you're not supposed to add, I mean, you can add soy, but it's not technically there. But we always order like something which requires soy when we eat Korean food, or I always have soy around. So I always make sure I add a little bit of soy as well, because I love soy. I love the flavor of soy. There. Again, taste test. This is just perfect. It is so delicious. It's got this really sharp flavor, and then there's a little sweetness offsetting it, but you can taste the garlic and you can taste the sesame. You can also actually add toasted sesame to this. I personally don't like to, because I just sprinkle the sesame directly on the bibimbap. And the last one is the flavoring we're making for some of the vegetables. Now, in that, we're going to take a tablespoon of sesame oil. You can see a recurrent theme here: sesame, sesame, sesame. And we're going to add around a tablespoon of sesame seeds. This is toasted sesame seeds. Now, if you can't find toasted sesame seeds, you just take any sesame and you just lightly roast it on like a stove top or something. And that's it. You can actually add salt to this as well, but I don't like to, because I add salt to the vegetables, and I would prefer adding it on top because sometimes it gets a little bit too salty. And we're going to add some scallions to this, a good amount of scallions. Okay, this needs a little more oil because the oil just disappeared. Okay, this is perfect. And this is just actually seasoning we're going to be adding to our vegetables, which we're going to be making next. You mix this till it's nice, and then you do a little drop test. I like to call it the drop test, where you take a little bit of batter and you drop it on your pan to see if your pan is hot enough. This looks like it needs a little more work, so we're just going to let it heat up. I just make a small one just to make sure that the salt and all that is correct too. I just taste it. This is just right. So I'm going to make the ones for the hotteok, the street food dessert pancake first. Now, instead of making it stuffed, I'm just going to make 2 thin pancakes and sandwich it. So all you do is you take 1 spoonful and drop it right in the middle. You let it spread out. You can see the hot stone is getting nice and hot, and there's like leftover sesame oil from previous bibimbap, so it gets very smoky. The rice is done. We're heating water here for the vegetables of the bibimbap. Meanwhile, we're going to wait for this. We're going to add a little dash of oil. Here. This is the sizzle that you wait to hear when you're making pancakes. You want to make sure that the top is not runny. Here. Flip it. And then you can press down a little bit also to make sure that it's fully cooked. We're going to make a couple more for the dessert. While these are cooking, we're going to take our scallions. We're going to use the scallion and we're going to add around 2 ladlefuls. It should be enough batter to cover the base of your saucepan. I'm going to stir it up. Now you want to make sure your scallion is thin and cut, because if it's very thick, it will make your pancake very thick, which you don't want a very thick pancake. There, perfect. You take your scallion mixture and you just put the whole thing in. And then you spread it out so that it's not too thick. In this, it shouldn't be too hot because it will stick. So I'm going to make it a bit lower. And I'm going to prepare the kimchi batter till then. You take some of the kimchi and the sauce with it. I love kimchi. Normally kimchi has fish sauce in it, so I don't get to eat it too often unless I'm making it. I just love it. It is so delicious. It's very hot, but if you can handle the spice, it's very tasty. Yeah, it looks flippable. And you press down to make sure that it's getting nice and cooked. I'm going to let this get crisper and I'm going to increase the heat again. A little more oil. You know, scallion pancake is something that if you get in Chinese restaurants, Japanese, Korean, and it's so tasty and it's just so easy to make. I mean, you can literally have this dish ready to serve in 10 minutes, which is with the soy sauce. I mean, there's no reason not to do this at home. This is done. We're going to take this off and we're going to put in the kimchi. Spread it out so that no one area has all the kimchi. So let's flip this. It's better to use a non-stick pan. There, this side is perfectly done. I'm going to add a little oil. Non-stick really makes things not stick, which is logical because that's the name. But also you can use a lot less oil than you would have to otherwise. Which if your food's tasty and you don't need the oil, it's better not to have the oil. This is almost done. The scallion pancake, because the scallions are so fresh, you have this crunch, and the pancake is salty while the sauce is a little bit sweet, and it has scallions in it too. But those scallions taste very different from these scallions. I think this is done. Let's flip it to check. Yep. I'm just going to actually cook it for 1 more minute to make sure that the insides are done too. Perfect. I'm just going to overlap it. What we're making next is bibimbap. Now we'll start off the bibimbap. So your pot should be hot enough that you actually hear a sizzle when you put a little bit of oil in it. So you put a little bit of sesame oil, take some of the rice, the crispy rice, and layer the bottom. This sizzle will make it nice and crispy at the bottom. You can put a good amount. It gets over in no time. Yeah, and let this sit there. Meanwhile, we're going to prepare the vegetables. We're going to lower the heat a bit. We're going to prepare the vegetables. Now the vegetables we're going to put in this are spinach, shiitake mushrooms, zucchini, carrots, and mung bean sprouts. I have julienne the carrots and the zucchini, and it's very simple to cook them. For half the vegetables, which is 1, 2, and 3, we're just going to saute them with a little bit of salt and oil. And for half the vegetables, we are going to actually boil some water and blanch them. It's like you'll just put a little bit of salt, which is why I didn't add the salt in the seasoning. And you stir it in. I'm going to do the mung beans first. And you just leave them like this for around 3 minutes. Meanwhile, this is hot. I'm going to put a little oil. And you have to be sure not to overcook. The whole charm of this dish is that it's so fresh and yummy. And a little bit of salt. That's quite hot. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take it off and put it on its base, because the stone stays hot for a long time. Turn that off. So try to keep them in the same line, like the carrots. Put it in one corner. Next we're going to add the zucchini. You could also use cucumbers instead of zucchini. Meanwhile, for the spinach, we don't want so much stem. These are washed spinach, so I just break the stems off. We're going to rinse this under cold water for a minute. Replace it. And we're going to add that spicy dressing that we made. You don't want your zucchini overcooked. You can put it right next to the carrots. Put a little bit of oil again. The mushrooms. I sometimes use tree mushrooms also instead of sprouts. Salt. The importance of salt always reminds me of King Lear. Add this to the side. So this is just some firm tofu. Mushrooms are done. The spinach is done. We're going to sprinkle the tofu right here. Actually, that was the spinach place. I'm going to move this side so that I still have space for spinach. We're going to fry an egg. Normally, a bibimbap this is very optional if you don't eat egg, but the egg tastes nice on it. I like the egg in it. So you just crack an egg and you fry it. So you can use any vegetables you want, whatever's in your fridge, any greens you want. You're going to add the seasoning again. The fresh vegetables, you know, in which you want the water to be retained, you blanch them, and the other ones you saute them. And again, this is literally, as you can see, it takes no time. If you have prepared rice, leftover rice, whatever you have. I'm going to put this on the side. You're going to put a little sprinkle of sesame on this. I'm just going to flip my egg. I don't like it too runny anyway. You don't want it too cooked either. This is so delicious. You have the soft, the crunchy, the greens, mushrooms, which are their own flavor. You have a little crisp rice at the bottom. You have the sesame seeds, which add that little flavor here and there. And we're going to top it off with this delicious sauce, which is hot and sweet and spicy. Okay, I think this is done. So we're going to flip this right in the center and crack it open a bit. There, the bibimbap is done. All that's left now is the dessert. What we're going to do is we're going to sandwich these two pancakes with some red bean paste. Now, these are the azuki beans I mentioned initially, and they've been in Southeast Asia for the longest time, in Asia for the longest time. And you take these beans, you soak them overnight, and you boil them. This is 2 cups, and I've boiled it, and I mashed half a cup with, half the portion, which is 1 cup, with half a cup of sugar. Now, if you taste this, it tastes a bit raw, so it needs cooking. What you're going to do is take a little bit of oil, and I'm not going to do all of it, I'm just going to do a little bit to show you how it's done. And we'll put it in this. And you just mush it in a little more. This is very easy to do, but it's just, I have a pressure cooker, so I use it with a pressure cooker because beans and pressure cooker, you can slow cook them if you have a crock pot or something. See, you can see the texture changes. If you compare this texture to this texture, this has a lot more finished feel to it. There, I'm going to take this off the heat because you don't want it overheated. It can get burnt. There, that's perfect. We're going to take some. And we're going to layer it. And then we're going to remove this. We're going to heat the whole thing for a minute. You can see if it's well done, it just comes right off. The pan's already hot, so I'm just going to put it on. This is what the street food looks like. Normally they stuff it and they mash it, but this is easier to make. And you're not going to mess up with this. It has to be eaten hot. So what we haven't talked about yet is the drink for today, which is Shoju. Shoju is a Korean drink, and it is made with fermented rice. Now, this has alcohol volume 19%, and it's really interesting. It can go up really high, and the government only has control over it over a certain percentage of alcohol. Now, this is had straight, and I'm going to do something which is considered very wrong in Korea. You're not supposed to serve yourself. And it's really interesting. If you get it from an older person, you're supposed to receive it like this with your hands, and you're supposed to hide your face away and drink it on the side. This is really tasty, and it's very tasty, and this is what's normally had. Again, as I mentioned, the etiquette has a lot to do with the way life is in Korea and the food. Now, One of the other differences between Korean and Japanese is in Korea you use a spoon as well. In Japan you only use chopsticks. And this is in Korea you get these sets which you use together. So what you do now at this stage is you take as much of the sauce as you like and you spread it around. As I said, I'm partial to a lot of sauce. And I'm personally going to, and you just mix up the whole thing. You go down to the bottom. As you can see you have some crispy, crunchy burnt rice. I love burnt rice. And you just mix the whole thing together. So the whole thing gets like the flavoring. And you eat straight from the bowl with your chopsticks. So we have our scallion pancake here, which I'm going to try this kimchi, which I love. I've put in some sauce. It's delicious. You can accompany that with or without the kimchi if you want. Every time I take a bite of kimchi, it's like a little bite of heaven. It's crunchy, but at the same time it's soft. It's not like raw cabbage. It's got these flavors of sweet, and the fermentation gives a particular flavor which you either like or don't. If you don't like fermented food, you probably wouldn't like this. And you have your red bean paste. I love. This is a little bit of an acquired taste. If you've grown up with it, then you know, you get used to it. It took me a little while, but I read a lot of Asian comics and they're always like raving about red bean paste. So I tried it a few times from different places, and how it's made makes a big difference. So the pancakes are a little bit flat. They're not the fluffy kind of pancakes, and so they're kind of dense, while the red bean paste is kind of softer, gentler, and it's salty versus sweet, and because it's hot it tastes really good. I don't need to talk about this yummalicious food, but all I can say is bon appetit.